What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. Today, I'm rebroadcasting an interview I did with the fabulous Bonnie Lykes Bigler of The Writer's Voice on WIOX radio a few years back. Bonnie is one of my favorite writers, and she's also a phenomenal spoken word performer. Now, you may not know this, but the Writer Unleashed podcast is a spin-off of a 4-week online course I ran back in 2016 to help writers overcome common misconceptions about the writing process and doubts about their own innate abilities to write their own stories. So you'll hear references to that iteration of Writer Unleashed. You'll also hear references to emergingwriters.us, which was my blog back in the day, which, by the way, is also being reimagined post-pandemic as the Emerging Writers Academy, a monthly membership training for fiction and memoir writers set to launch this fall. In this interview, Bonnie and I talk about what compels us to write our stories in the first place, what stops us in our tracks, rejection, loss of motivation, etc. We talk about the importance of learning how to read like a writer and the ship and learn approach I learned from one of my coaches. This is a juicy conversation, so sit back and enjoy. Here we go. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach, and each week we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin.
So, for today's show, I usually cast my net wide for themes, and of course, I pull in subjects that I feel genuinely inspired by. And today, I have a special guest who is very generative herself and also helpful to other writers. And while she's local here in the Catskills, she actively participates in a much broader scope of creativity and service with her work that extends internationally. Visiting with us today is Nancy Panuccio. She wears a few different hats, but all are interconnected in the world of words. She is an editor, story coach, and creator of the online course, Writer Unleashed. Her work has been published in the New Yorker, Red Book, and the Italian lifestyle magazine Inizio. She holds an MFA in writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts, and is a finalist in the Howard Frank Mosher Short Fiction Prize and the Gulf Coast Fiction Award. Nancy also writes about the art and craft of writing over at emergingwriters.us. Thank you for joining us today, Nancy.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I'm looking so forward to hearing about everything you're doing. Not only are you very busy with your own writing, which you'll be sharing with us later on, but it sounds like you do a great deal of coaching and editing for other writers, and we'll be getting into all of that most definitely. But first, could you share how you developed and chose a life as a professional writer yourself?
Well, as a child, I read voraciously. I still do, but I started reading very early on, very young, and I just developed a love affair with books. And then somewhere along, I guess it was 3rd or 4th grade, I got my first writing assignment, which was describe your bedroom.
Right.
And so it was the first time I felt really captivated by actually writing something. There was something about immortalizing a moment or an experience. Yes. And then as I continued to write later on, it became more about kind of excavating my past.
Oh, yeah.
And trying to understand myself better and my place in the world and make sense of what really was kind of a chaotic childhood.
Yes, I think that's why, that's one of the great fortunes of being a writer is that we can sort of dig down in the dirt.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can you tell us the genre of writing you love to generate most these days?
Well, for the longest time, I was writing fiction. And now that's starting to shift. So for maybe the first 20, 25 years of writing, I always felt pulled towards fiction. In fact, when I took a nonfiction writing course, I found that I was making things up as I was telling the truth.
Awesome.
So great. I was always inventing and kind of throwing different elements from different experiences into the same story. So I had a teacher once who said that when asked the difference between fiction and nonfiction, said, it's all fiction.
Yeah, because it's all within our own head.
Right. And memory
yeah.
is really an imaginative construct.
And only one perspective.
Exactly.
So that's very, very
right.
true.
So it's a truth.
Yeah.
But it's not the truth. But these days I'm leaning more towards memoir. So I've been exploring writing that so that I'm actually not hiding behind fiction, because I think for a while it was really thinly disguised autobiography. So now I'm exploring the memoir genre.
Great, wonderful. And you attended Vermont College of Fine Arts for your MFA. I'm curious, learning here a little bit about your experience there. Do you give the curriculum and overall journey at that campus a high rating?
It was a phenomenal experience. I would do it all over again. I would be an MFA student forever if I could. It was that rich and rewarding. And there's something about the intensity of that experience and having the positive pressure to constantly produce every month, and to have a mentor, a one-on-one mentor who gets to understand your rhythms as a writer and really understand your work and help you develop your voice and help guide you through the murky process of writing a story, which can be so overwhelming. That to me was the best experience ever.
Wow. And I bet that a real feeling of bonding and trust happens in the group or the groups.
And just to be among people who are just as fascinated and committed to the writing process. Because we feel alone when we're writing. It can be a very isolating process. But when you're surrounded by other people that are just as committed to writing a really good story.
Yeah, perhaps almost scientifically interested. Really studying the details in a very neutral way. Perhaps. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So, Nancy, what do you think are the benefits now in your life of having acquired an MFA? And I'm asking because so many people struggle with should I do it or not,
Well, first, let me say I don't think it's the only way to go. I think that there are several great workshops if you can find a very good facilitator and be very selective about who you study with, whether it's a mentor one-on-one or it's in a workshop setting. Because an MFA, I could never do it now at the point I am in my life now, but 10 years ago, I was able to, and it's not for everyone. It's expensive, and you really need to commit, I would say, full time to developing the craft and really getting the most out of the MFA. So it's not for everybody.
Yes.
And as far as holding the MFA, it's not like you leave your school and you can produce a book and get published. It doesn't work that way. It's because it's 2 years, which is a drop in the bucket, really. It's just the beginning. But I would say for me, what was transformational, that was different from the workshops I had taken for years, was that I finally learned how to read. And not only how to read, but to articulate why a certain piece of prose moved me in a certain way, or why it failed to in a certain way. Yeah. So it was a matter of learning how to extract elements of craft out of a text and really study it and pull it apart and tease it apart and see how things work. To me, that was where I learned how to actually teach myself how to write, which is the best gift ever.
That's a beautiful description of the benefits, and they sound priceless, you know. And it's a perfect springboard for the next question, which we'd love to hear about your 2 projects, Writer Unleashed, and your blog. I think it's a dedicated blog on the Emerging Writers websites. And what these stand for and offer, Nancy?
Writer Unleashed is an audio course. It's a 4-part audio course. It's a self-study course. I developed it because time and again, when I spoke to students or some of my readers, and I would say, what are you struggling most with? The answer I got was rather surprising, because I always thought, well, maybe they would say, oh, I'm struggling with creating a great character or something technical, but it wasn't that. At the core, what everyone struggles with is staying motivated, keeping in the zone, keeping in the flow, staying inspired, accessing their voice, writing from a true place. Those kinds of issues is always at the core, regardless of what other things you're struggling with. Tremendous self-doubt, not really understanding the having these misconceptions about the writing process, and really about themselves, about their ability to write great stories, because a lot of writers think it should be easier than this. They read a book and they see the finished product, and then they go to write their own stuff, and it falls short of their highest vision of the piece. So they have what Ira Glass calls their good taste, and then they have what's on the page, and there's such a big gap between that they think, oh, I'm not talented. How can I possibly even call myself a writer? So my course, Writer Unleashed, is an attempt to get them to go beyond those self-doubts and realize that we are all struggling with the same stuff.
And who would know? Because writers tend to isolate.
Exactly.
Don't talk. Don't even, like you say, don't even understand the deeper impetus of the issues that are blocking them.
Exactly. And they think they're all alone. And the truth is that even the writers that seem so prolific and are writing these gorgeous novels and stories, they too have gone through tremendous confusion and frustration and self-doubt and rejection, and people don't see that. They don't see, the backstage, behind the scenes of what went into producing that gorgeous book.
Yes. And it's really heartwarming to know that that you've created this resource for writers so that we can keep writing alive. And that's so, it's such a benevolent thing in our culture. I don't want it to disappear with the way our language has gone so lightweight with, you know what I mean? You're only allowed 9 words. So anyway, that's amazing. And did you want to tell us about your blog a little bit?
Sure.
Yeah.
So emergingwriters.us, that started, I had a workshop in 2006 called the Emerging Writer Studio. And it was a group of 8 writers for 2 years, the same group of writers. And I wanted to have a monthly newsletter to keep in touch with them and to keep them inspired and to keep them learning about craft. And so as the readership grew, and so now I have readers from all over the world, it's a way for me to keep that conversation going. Wow. And so when I have a workshop, in between workshops, my students and readers, they're subscribed to the newsletter, and so that they can keep getting more grounded in their craft, keep getting inspired. I like to talk about some of the common challenges that we all feel, so that again, they don't feel so isolated and alone and ashamed of having the self-doubt or having the struggle, because that's part of the process.
Yes. In our global village, what are some of the countries that you have found clients?
India, Australia.
Wow, wonderful.
England.
And did they find you through a Google search?
Yeah, somehow people stumble across the blog and they subscribe, and I'm always amazed at the emails I get with the gratitude for having stumbled across what I read about.
Do you ever Skype with them? Or?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
that's great.
I do. Yeah.
So, what you're adding some new courses to emerging writers?
I'm in the process of creating a course that's centered on character development, because I think one of the questions I get a lot from writers that either read my blog or who I work with is this question of, should I start with plot first? Is that the first thing I should do, is plot? And I always say no. I don't think that's the best way to enter the story, because there's a difference between plot and story. Plot is what happens, A to Z. This happens and this happens and that happens. But story is about who it happens to. And ultimately, readers don't care about what happens. They care about the emotional journey, and that's the story. And that's all connected to character, and every other technical aspect stems from character, point of view, detail selection, setting, everything comes back to character. So this course is going to explore that in more depth.
Well, sounds great. And, there's also something about when somebody's writing something, be it a memoir or perhaps fiction, that you want the reader to be able to trust you. So you might want to take risks in the way you reference things, but at the same time, you want them to be able to follow things in a cogent way. So I'm wondering if your writers run into you just kind of dealing with that too, because you don't want things to be so plain and obvious as you're describing how things unfold.
Right.
Yeah. Nancy, I'm wondering, did you collaborate with anyone else, or did both these websites spring from your own personal motivation? Well, of course, your blog did, but did Writer Unleashed, was that just a sole venture?
It was a sole venture, but I will say that if I collaborated with anyone, it was with my readers and with my students, because what I always do is I ask, what are you struggling with? And that's how Writer Unleashed came about. So if I collaborated with anyone in all of my programs, even my workshops, the content is always driven by the students.
Yeah, because as we all know so well, writing is a solitary craft. So do you actually sense that the writers who are attracted to Writer Unleashed need to break out of that solitude a little bit? In other words, do you feel that the connection is almost therapeutic, the way that you might connect with them?
Yes, and I especially because I like to give them feedback directly on the work that they're doing. That's part of the program, so they have access to me, and I like to get on the phone with them. So that gets them out of that isolation. It helps them break through some of their blocks, but beyond that, I think the most powerful thing is having a live workshop, a live to actually make eye contact. To me, that's the most powerful. That's why I love my workshops so much. Is that we really get to connect in a way that isn't possible over Skype or through email.
Yes, yeah, that's great. That's great. Do you have any coming up, or are they?
They're in the works.
We're in the works.
Yeah, we're planning one for sometime towards the end of the year.
Excellent. And do you assist writers in all genres, maybe even poetry?
Poetry is not. I'm not qualified to give anyone constructive feedback on poetry. Although I love to read it, it's not
It is its own universe.
It really is, and because I didn't study it. I don't really understand the technical elements that make. I can say, oh, this is beautiful, but not exactly explain why it has that impact on me technically. So poetry is not one of the genres that I work in.
With all the work you do you ever personally experience, an apathy for writing, like kind of a writer's fatigue, perhaps, where you just need to take breaks, or do you just,
Oh, we all do.
Yes.
Whatever the art form is, we get fatigue. Whether we're studying ballet or, music, there's always a fatigue. But it's important to take breaks. It's important to take breaks. So when I find that fatigue where I'm actually doing more damage to the piece than good, I step away from the computer. I go take a walk. I get out in nature. I like to be by water, so there's a nice stream by my house, and that resets me. And then I have some distance from the work because we always also, it feels good when in the rush of the first draft, but then the next day we look at it and it's like, oh, this is we sometimes tend to loathe what we wrote. So it's a good time to get a little objectivity, a little distance, and step away and let the subconscious, because our subconscious is always working out that story when we're relaxed, because then we're receptive. But if we're too close to the work, we're not receptive. And so stepping away, taking breaks, however long it takes, do it.
Yes, and that can be such a crushing experience, when you feel like what you wrote 2 days ago is garbage.
Yeah, right?
It feels very claustrophobic, and you can literally just, feel a sense of fear, like, oh my gosh, what
panic.
What was I thinking?
Yeah.
A lot of people begin with a lot of enthusiasm, of course, to start something big, say a memoir or a novel, and then they do run out of steam. And do you feel that people, and you were sort of lighting on this before, but do you feel people get stuck for typically all the same reasons, or sometimes are they very, very individual, why people just throw in the towel and,
Yeah, I think most people get stuck in the middle of the story because sometimes it's easy to begin. And even sometimes we know the beginning and the end, but it's the middle where things start to sag and fall apart. And what happens often is that we are inundated with this influx of associations that we make in memory, and there's too much coming in, right? So at that point, it's always good to either get, an editor or a mentor, or take it to another group of writers for some perspective to help you kind of go through the morass of material and kind of make sense of it. So we all hit that impasse, but what's great about the impasse is that that's our opportunity for the next breakthrough. That roadblock is where we have to look at it and say, okay, how can I get beyond this? What do I need to learn here? Why am I stuck? Is it because there's a certain technique that I'm not quite understanding? And so that's when it's really good to get another writer or a group of writers to help us see it more clearly.
Yes, indeed. Now, you came over to the Catskills from New York City in 2002, is that right?
Yes.
And do you find it easier to write in a more rural area as opposed to being in an urban environment, which offers a completely different stimulation, as we all know?
I'd have to say yes to that. There's something about being here that makes me feel very expansive. And there's a quiet that I didn't get in New York City. However, for me too, there's something about changing my environment that will give me kind of a surge of new inspiration. So, for instance, when I first moved to Manhattan, the sensations were so full on and so different and stimulating that I began some new work right then and there. Of course, after a while, it became too much stimulation, overstimulation, and I had to leave New York. I was traveling a lot, every 6 weeks, going to different countries just to change up my environment. So for me, I also like to change environment as well. Yeah. But overall, the Catskills is I'm very happy here. It's a great place for me to write.
Yes, changing environment certainly does provide fresh eyes sometimes, and it feels like a overhaul for the brain. That's great. So back touching on inspiration and motivation again, since there's no guarantees for particularly, young writers that have no connections or experience, there's no guarantee of getting published. What can a writer do to keep themselves inspired or to really begin something, in spite of that maybe looming over their goal that it may not happen?
Yeah, I think if you're really enthralled to the process and that you're really present with the process of writing and that you can appreciate the joy in that, because it's such a wonderful gift to be able to want to write and to be able to do it and to actually do it. I think sometimes writers have a premature focus on publishing, on the end result, on the outcome rather than the process. And I understand that because we want the validation, right?
Yes,
it's
after all the work.
Absolutely, sure. It's like, so I'm going to spend 10 years writing a novel, then what? But I really believe that the more that you are present in the process of writing, I think and publishing is a worthy endeavor, of course, but sometimes it gets in the way of the really important endeavor, which is to write a really good story. And I think if you pay attention to that, to writing the best story that you can, the publishing will happen sooner or later. But first you have to write the book. And first you have to, it's just like any other art, really. And sometimes people think it should be easy, but no, it's not any different than any other fine art, dancing, music. It's a rigorous practice. It's a lifetime study.
Yes, and indeed. And do you have any recommendations of how writers can deal with ongoing rejection?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is to realize that every writer worth his or her salt has been rejected several times. Yeah. So, for instance, Sylvia Plath, Bell Jar, was dismissed originally, and they said, "Oh, there's no extraordinary talent here. It's kind of mediocre."
Yes, right.
All right.
Yes.
Catherine Stockett, who wrote The Help, which then became this great film, she had 60 rejections. 60. Yeah. Before the book was published. Yes, now, imagine she could have stopped at the 14th rejection. Yes. Some of us stop at the first and the second, right?
Yes.
So the first thing is to realize that every writer, it doesn't matter how prolific and successful they are, they've had so many rejections to get to that point. Yes. So it's part of the process. And then to think of it as information, I once had a coach as I was developing my online course, and his advice was really interesting. He said, ship and learn. So in other words, ship the product, ship the course, get the feedback, and use that feedback as instruction for getting it better. So when it comes to rejection, I guess we could say is you submit periodically, but you revise often. So you're always developing your craft.
Yes.
And that's what we need to do.
Yes,
is just to keep writing.
Keep your eye on the sparrow, as they say.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Writer Unleashed. If this episode resonated with you, please go leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews are key to keeping Writer Unleashed on the top of the charts where other writers can find us. I'll see you next week with a brand new episode. In the meantime, join us on our private Facebook group, Writer Unleashed Community. It's totally free to join. And if you want more free resources plus writing tips I only share in email, sign up over at nancypanuccio.com. I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Till then, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.